What have you done? You maniacs!
No. You know what? No. This needs something different. This needs something new. You know what? Launching a new video series. Right now. Needs to happen. Let's go. I am Justice, and welcome to the first episode of Passing Judgment. This will be a probably semi-regular video series that I do, which is basically when I feel so passionately about a certain topic that I feel that the written word, as much as I love it, is just not quite enough. I was about to say to do justice to the topic, but that would be a really bad pun, so we're just going to skip past that. So, let's dive into the balance changes that were announced just earlier today. I'm going to go over each one and my thoughts on them. Some will be quicker than others, and some are simpler. So let's first dive into the Druid cards. First, we have Innervate. This is a card that has clearly been a problem for quite a while. It's a card that and I know I'm not the only one, has argued should be rotated to the Hall of Fame. It does too much for too little opportunity cost. The card has not been okay for quite a while. So it has been changed. So instead of giving 2 extra mana, it gives 1. This is a change that, in my opinion, will very likely actually make the card stop being played in Druid, or at least played significantly less. We all know that Jade Druid is a real problem right now, and this does affect the power level of Jade Druid. We know they like to ramp, and a lot of times that ramp would lead to getting to 8 mana and innervating out Ultimate Infestation, and that was a huge deal. So this does change things a lot. It is now the same card as Counterfeit Coin in Rogue. They are now the same thing. Rogue has a lot of different ways to take advantage of that, whether it's because they're playing Miracle Rogue and going off with Gadgets and Auctioneer, or just to enable their combo keyword cards. Rogue has a lot of uses for Counterfeit Coin. Druid has a lot fewer uses for it. Innervate is one thing, Counterfeit Coin is another. They're very similar effects, but the difference between 1 and 2 on there is a big deal. Jade Druid's probably not going to be playing Innervate anymore. Maybe 1, probably 0. The thing is, Jade Druid is actually not the deck that's hurt most by the Innervate change. That's Token Druid. The ability to Innervate out a Vicious Fledgling on turn 1 was massive, could often be game-winning on the spot. Being able to play out a few minions, say on turn 2 or turn 3, and then Innervate Power of the Wild, or Innervate a Mark of the Lotus. These are really, really big plays for Token Druid. Without that, that deck's power level is definitely going to drop. It's not going to be unplayable. It's not going to suddenly be terrible, but Innervate did a lot of things for Token Druid, and frankly, I feel it did more for Token than it did for Jade. So really, this change seems to hurt Token Druid the most. Next Druid card that was changed is Spreading Plague. This one I'm not going to talk too much about. Spreading Plague is a problem. It's been a problem. I think the nerf is good. We actually recently spoke about Spreading Plague in the first episode of Judgestone, and Owen suggested that Spreading Plague actually be nerfed to 7 mana, believing this card was way out of line. I didn't necessarily disagree with him, but they're kind of going in the middle there. Nerfing it to 6 mana, I think, in conjunction with the Innervate nerf, it makes more sense. Because if it went to 7 mana, you could still play it for 5 with Innervate. So now, you know, we're bringing it to 6, but Innervate's probably not getting played. So it is a little bit more in line. I still think the card's probably good, probably still going to see some play, but this definitely brings it down a notch, and it needed that. So I think that was a good change overall. Speaking of changes that I am perfectly fine with myself, we have 1 Shaman card in Hex. Blizzard stated they understand that this card has not been a huge problem, but kind of just heading off a future problem, basically. I think it's fine. Hex at 3 mana was always a little interesting. It is basically Shaman's version of Polymorph. They serve essentially the same purpose, and it now has the same mana cost. Obviously, a 0/1 taunt is slightly different than a 1/1 without taunt, but it basically serves the same purpose. It is basically a free silence. They don't want silence effects to come extremely cheaply, so they brought it to 4 mana. I think that's fine. Respect the decision. The timing obviously seems weird for a lot of people, since Shaman is obviously not a super popular class at the moment, but the change makes sense, so as long as they're changing cards, cool. Go for it. You're going to notice my tone change a little bit here over these next 2 cards. So let's start with Murloc Warleader. I don't love the change, but I do understand where they're coming from. As of right now, it's specifically Murloc Paladin that is a strong Murloc-based deck. And when your opponent curves out perfectly with Murloc, say Murloc Tidecaller into Rockpool Hunter, into Murloc Warleader, into Gentle Megasaur, it's an extremely hard sequence of events to get past if they're able to do that. And obviously, Warleader buffing the health of the Murlocs can sometimes make it more difficult to deal with. So I understand that. However, this card is not totally out of line. Obviously, that dream scenario doesn't occur every single time. But my biggest issue with this was their reasoning of wanting to simplify health buffs. Basically, they're saying that, and they actually gave this specific example of Wild Pyromancer plus Equality not clearing your board. And that can be a really unintuitive interaction. So why is that a problem for me? Well, 2 main reasons. One, there's plenty of unintuitive interactions in Hearthstone that they're perfectly happy with, that it's just kind of you do it once, you see what happens, and then you know for the future. I'm not saying that's always the way everything should be done, that we should just remove all card text on cards and let everybody figure it out. Not saying that. But what I am saying is that that is an inconsistent stance to be taking, given how often they are okay with that kind of thing. Using it as a reason to nerf Warleader just doesn't sit well with me. Speaking of inconsistency, that still exists. You have cards like Stormwind Champion, which is a card that's around forever. It's a card that brand new players have, that they use. You have Southsea Captain, which also gives a health buff, which, again, prevents things from being cleared by Wild Pyro Equality. These cards still exist in their current state. We're not just removing health buffs from the game entirely, so once again, it is inconsistent. Don't tell me that that's a reason why you decide to do something when you still have other cards that are doing the same thing. I understand they're not saying that is the only reason, then it would really be a problem. I understand that, but don't even mention that. Don't use that as something that factored into your decision, because clearly it's something that you're still okay with being in the game. So it doesn't make sense. Now, they did say that they considered changing Rockpool Hunter instead of Murloc Warleader, but decided on Warleader, A, because of wanting to simplify health buffs, and B, because it will be in standard format longer. Standard thing I get. Simplifying health buffs thing, obviously, I've explained, I think to be nonsense. Changing Rockpool Hunter was probably a better idea. That's one of the cards that is making Murloc Paladin so strong right now, because it curves so well from your one-drop Murloc into Rockpool Hunter, into Warleader. So if they feel the deck is totally out of line, which I don't think it is. It's certainly very strong. I don't think it's Jade Druid. They could have changed Rockpool Hunter. Maybe make it a 2/2. Or whatever you want to do. Just throwing something out there. Not my official suggestion. But if you want to do something, you could have changed Rockpool Hunter. You could have done other things. I'm not saying this is the worst thing ever. It's not. I don't know that it was necessary, and it certainly took a lot of people by surprise. This was a weird one. Now, I'm going to move on to the one that makes me the most upset. Some people are going to love this change. A lot of people are going to question it, and a fair number of people are going to hate it. Fiery War Axe. This is one of the most iconic cards, I want to say, in that when you think of a certain class, you think of X card. When you think of Warrior, you think of Fiery War Axe. It's very commonly been referred to as Fiery Wind Axe because it is just so good. And don't get me wrong, the card was really good. It's a very, very strong weapon. Probably one of the best basic cards in the game. I would say actually War Axe and Innervate are probably the two strongest basic cards in the game. Best weapon in the game, certainly. But does that mean that it needed to be nerfed? Warrior is a class that is focused around its weapons, more than any other class. Even, other classes that have weapons, whether it be Rogue, Paladin, what have you. Warrior is built around their weapons. So them having this iconic, very strong weapon that doesn't just win the game for them, as soon as it's played, but that is definitely very strong, is not necessarily a bad thing. I will come back in just a little bit about how it could have been done, once I can give a little more context. I do want to talk once again about the reasoning they gave behind the changes. They talk about synergy with pirates, and how that's very strong. But the thing is, Fiery War Axe isn't only utilized by Pirate Warrior. It's actually an extremely important tool in Control Warrior decks, specifically to combat aggro, so that you have a way of removing those early minions so that you can play your control deck. Now, if Control Warrior were just really, really good right now, and War Axe was a big reason, so they're kind of, killing two birds with one stone, that would be one thing. Control Warrior is not in a great spot right now. It's just not. Particularly if you're not a really dedicated Control Warrior player. The deck is not strong right now. But you know who is a really dedicated Control Warrior player? Fibonacci. A guy who is considered by many to probably be the foremost Warrior player in the world. Unsurprisingly, he had some thoughts about this, and he actually tweeted out that nerfing War Axe around an aggro deck that rotates out in 8 months, but crippling all other archetypes forever. And also the reasoning is just insulting. And I could not agree more. The Pirate Warrior decks are going to lose a lot of steam once some of the key Pirates patches, among others, are rotated out. Obviously, they still exist in Wild, but that's okay. And the reasoning part, again, is crazy, because the other part we haven't talked about yet is that it's less disruptive, in their words, to change the mana cost on a card rather than anything else on it, because the mana cost is always visible while it's sitting in your hand, on the bottom of the screen. That reasoning is basically reviving the too confusing for new players meme that kept us with 9 deck slots for so long. The thing is this, whenever changes are made to cards, yeah, they're all over the internet, they're all over Reddit, but I know a large portion of the player base doesn't really pay attention to those things, and that's what Blizzard is worried about. But here's the thing, what they do, and which is a really good idea, and I'm really glad they do it, is whenever card changes go into effect, the first time you open the game after those changes are made, you get a big pop-up. Not a little thing of, hey, click here to look at changes. They give you a big pop-up with full wording explaining what the changes are, pictures showing the changes from the old card to the new card. They show you these things. So the type of player who chooses to willfully ignore that being thrown in their face, they deserve to find out the hard way. that the card was changed. They shouldn't be catered to at the expense of everyone else. So that reasoning really, to me, is garbage. I understand that a large portion of the player base is not competitive, whether it be playing competitively or just trying to get, even past rank 10 on the ladder. I understand a large portion of the player base is in the rank 20 to 15 area, only plays every once in a while, or it really is just a mobile game for them. I get that. But when a card is changed, you can't ignore it. So saying, well, because mana cost is easier to see if you're not paying attention to your cards, is not a good reason to me. And here's the thing. As a basic card that is played in most warrior decks, Fiery War Axe, as I said, is kind of iconic for the class. And their iconic weapon is now a strictly worse version of Rallying Blade, and Eaglehorn Bow, and Shadow Blade, and King's Defender, or Power Mace, for those of you who play Wild. So, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I argue, personally, I feel the card didn't need to be nerfed at all. Very, very strong, no doubt about it, but it was okay. But if it needed to be nerfed, there's other ways you could have done it. They said they considered making it a 2/2 weapon, but they didn't for the reason of catering to the player who wants to ignore changes to his cards. But there's other ways they could have done it too. It could have been given an effect such as can only attack minions if they're really worried about being too strong in aggro. This is still a very simple effect, which is what they want for basic cards. They don't want basic cards to be super complicated. They want them to be an introduction to the game for new players. So I've seen some suggestions online of things that would be a little more difficult for a brand new player, especially one who hasn't played card games before, to grasp. So we want to keep it simple. This is a simple effect. Can only attack minions. So Pirate Warrior can't go face with it. Fair enough, if that's really your concern. Just one idea. With that change, it's not as good as it was, but it's not still now strictly worse than all of these other weapons that used to be compared to Fiery War Axe. And now it's just not that great. They, in the post, say, well, now it's comparable to Eaglehorn Bow, a card that is played in most Hunter decks, even though they don't usually take advantage of the effect. Well, I mean, that's great, except when Eaglehorn Bow was most popular, the decks were absolutely taking advantage of its effect. And also, we're kind of at apples and oranges here. Fiery War Axe for Warrior has never been what Eaglehorn Bow was supposed to be for Hunter. These are two different cards. Yes, now they're both 3-mana, 3/2 weapons. That doesn't mean that they are now comparable, and they are now the same. Warrior does not play the same way Hunter does. Warrior does not need the same things that Hunter needs. You cannot compare these two and say, see, everything's fine. Again, personally, I don't feel the card need to be nerfed at all. You might disagree with that, and I respect that. I don't think that anyone who says, oh, well, the card needed something to change, is that they're absolutely wrong, but I think there are ways to do it where the card still has some identity, where there's still some reason for Warriors to play it, and that it's not just this worse than Rallying Blade card. And that's really where I think the problem is. So this change in particular, to me, really stood out as being highly questionable, to put it nicely. So this brings us back to our main question now. Because, again, Ben Brode's tweet originally said, we're aware of the Druid issue, basically. We're looking into things to do about it. Okay, so they knew Jade Druid was an issue. So, do these changes do enough to bring down the power level of Jade Druid? My argument is probably not. So here's the thing. It is true that the power level of Jade Druid, in a vacuum, does go down with these changes. The nerfs to Innervate and Spreading Plague do make Jade Druid a slightly less powerful deck than it is today. However, 3 of the best decks right now to play against Jade Druid are Pirate Warrior, Murloc Paladin, and Token Druid. Those are 3 of the best decks for you to play right now if you want to beat Jade Druid. They're not the only ones, but they're 3 of the best ones. All 3 of those decks are getting nerfed at the same time Jade Druid is. So it's too early to know for sure, and predictions might be way off, but at first glance, it seems to me this might actually be a net positive for Jade Druid. You bring the deck's power level a little bit, but you also hurt its counters. The deck should still be very good. So, overall, these changes mostly miss the mark for me. They don't seem to address the Jade Druid problem nearly enough. Again, they push down its natural counters, and there's some changes that very few people were even asking for that really seem to have come out of left field. So I am quite disappointed with the announcement today. I honestly just expected 1 or 2 cards to be changed to just bring Jade Druid down to earth a little bit and let other decks have a chance to shine. Specifically other control decks or late game oriented decks that currently just cannot compete with Jade Druid at all. Wanted to see something that would allow them a chance to rise, to have their time in the sun a little bit. I don't think this does enough. I could be wrong. But it seems to be a very light nerf to Jade Druid. So I'm very, very disappointed with the announcement today. However, there is one thing we haven't discussed yet that I am very happy about. For those of you who read my article about cards that I feel need to be rotated to the Hall of Fame, Innervate was in there, and that doesn't seem to be occurring. But another card that I mentioned was Ice Block. And at the end of their post, they pretty much seem to imply that Ice Block will be rotated to the Hall of Fame, but they only want to do Hall of Fame rotations at the beginning of a calendar year. So, seems like beginning of next year, when they do their next round of Hall of Fame inductions, so to speak, Ice Block will be one of the honorees. So that is fantastic. So that wraps up my thoughts on today's balance changes, but I want to know what you think. So feel free to leave a comment below. Let me know how you feel about the changes that were made. If there were any changes that you felt needed to be made that weren't, anything you feel was too much or not enough. Maybe you think I'm wrong and Fiery War Axe should have been nerfed even more. I don't know. But I want to know your thoughts. So definitely feel free to leave the comments. Let me know what you think. And thanks for tuning in, and I will see you next time.